Well, greetings, friends. Danielle Smith, president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. Now, I have been away for a couple of weeks. And what have you done while I've been away? My goodness, there's calamity happening at all levels. That is not what we're going to talk about today. But we are going to be talking about the trucking business because there's a great deal of change that is happening on the transportation fuels fronts and how we are going to do a conversion to low emissions vehicles. Let me just say one thing because I think that the change that happened this week is probably worth me commenting on. I was not expecting Aaron O'Toole to be defeated this week. There's obviously a lot of pressure happening with all of the political party leaders. There's a big shakeup happening in the political establishment, but I didn't think that they would make such a bold move. However, there is a real opportunity, I think, if the Conservative Party is able to identify some key principles around which they can organize, not just in Alberta, but also in Quebec. I've noticed over the years that it seems to me that Quebec and Alberta have been at odds on almost every national issue that gets put forward. If you look at a national issue and you say the regional breakdown, it almost seems like something that Quebec loves, Alberta hates, something Alberta loves, Quebec hates. But I think that we're on the cusp of a real breakthrough in being able to find issues that not only resonate here, but also resonate in La Belle Province. And that's one of the things we'll be talking about today, because one of the main issues I think that has caused the cleavage in the country has been our difference in approach to how we address the issue of clean energy, green energy, and emissions reduction. And sadly, in Quebec, they've been taking the approach, particularly under the new premier. I guess it's not that new, Premier Francois Legault, with the Coalition Avenir de Quebec. He initially started off as being very supportive of resource development. So I was quite enthusiastic about our ability to partner with him. In recent years and in recent months and even in recent days, he has shifted towards wanting to take the approach of not developing the energy sector, leaving oil and gas development in the ground. And there's legislation that is winding its way through in that respect. Now, there's a new political party in Quebec. Eric Duhem is leading up something called the Conservative Party of Quebec. And one of the main things that he decided to start the party on was this issue of resource development, the flip that we've seen in Quebec with Francois Legault. And so I'm not entirely sure how successful he will be. He's already polling at the same level as the Parti Québécois. And so I think that there is an opportunity for us to, maybe in a way that we've never been able to before, find a way to bring these interests into alignment. Resource development, particularly around natural gas. There's a Calgary-based company, Questair Energy, that has been fighting this fight and is still fighting the ban. They've just inked a deal with a Quebec-based company to develop, a Quebec-based First Nation to develop their resource and also share the revenues with the Abenaki. And so if you've got this alignment of a new emerging conservative movement in Quebec that's pro-natural gas development, plus you have this partnership with First Nations that is pro-natural gas development, plus you've got the emerging discussion around how we're going to develop hydrogen, and you've got Europe saying that they are going to look at nuclear and natural gas as being qualified for green energy investment. I don't know that I know it looks like the country's falling apart, but I guess what I'm seeing is silver lining that there may be more common cause with our friends in other provinces than we've ever had before. And in that spirit, I wanted to talk to Jeff Grant. He is with the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, most particularly the vice chair of Hydrogen BC, but he is a principal at Zen Clean Energy Solutions. And he has been doing a lot of work across the country in developing a national hydrogen strategy, as well as developing strategies in British Columbia, in the Maritimes and Atlantic Canada, working on one in Manitoba. And he's got a few things to tell us about the progress being made in Alberta. So could it be that the country is going to unite around natural gas development, greenhouse gas emissions, hydrogen economy? We're going to find out in this next discussion with Jeff Grant, who joins me now. Jeff, thanks so much for being with me today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So I want to understand where you came from in the hydrogen space. It's so funny. My husband and I talk about this a lot because I've been a hydrogen enthusiast for almost a decade. I think his dad was an enthusiast all the way back years ago, saying, "Why don't we use hydropower at or nuclear power at night to split natural gas or do the electrolysis process so that we can create hydrogen?" So I've been watching this for some time and been gravely disappointed that we hadn't made any headway on it. And then it seems like kaboom, all of a sudden everyone's talking about hydrogen. So tell me how you came into this space.
Yeah, happy to. I was with Ballard Power Systems for about 15 years. So Ballard Power Systems is a company that builds fuel cell engines, primarily for heavy duty equipment. So for trucks and rail, marine. They also have a long history in the automotive sector, working with Daimler and Ford. And at the time I left, they were working with Audi as well. So that's, yeah, so it's sort of in my DNA. I've been 22 years now here, sort of working at it. For the last 6 years, working with my partner under the banner of Zen Clean Energy Solutions. And yeah, it's interesting. I've seen so many shifts. I saw the irrational exuberance in the late 90s and those stock prices at $200 a share, and I've seen those collapse and now start to rebuild. So it's been pretty satisfying. And like you said, there is a lot of interest right now, and I think there was always this debate about battery electric technology and fuel cells, and I think there's been a little bit of a settling in terms of where each makes sense, and it's not an either or. So yeah, I'm optimistic now about where the sector is going.
So why didn't things take off in the 90s? Was it because there were more emerging, but perhaps more affordable technologies that emerged on a pure electric vehicle, a plug-in vehicle, or has the hydrogen industry had to retool and focus on a different sector of the economy?
I think the fuel cell sector, and we'll talk about some other applications later, but the fuel cell sector certainly is coalescing around heavy duty equipment. That's where hydrogen has an advantage. You can put more energy into the same volume, and at the same time, battery electric technology has gotten better, and it is really very viable for light duty passenger vehicles and sedans and things like that. So yeah, there's been sort of that natural. I don't know, sort of finding their footing in terms of both technologies and where they fit. So really, hydrogen, we seem to have sort of found a niche in that heavy duty side.
Okay, so then let's talk about the creation of hydrogen because I still get mixed reviews from those who are in the traditional sectors saying, yeah, hydrogen's still a fuel of the future. It's not going to be rolled out in any significant way immediately. I keep wanting to get a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, and I keep getting told you got to wait a decade for that to happen. And so I'm wondering what the holdup is. So there's obviously still some technical issues that have to be sorted out. So can we walk through those a little bit so that I understand why it's so difficult to build out that hydrogen infrastructure?
Sure, I think hydrogen infrastructure needs to be developed at scale to be economical. So we at Zen and in terms of our national strategy that we were the lead author for, we try to represent hydrogen as the key is that it's the carbon intensity is low, but you can certainly develop it through hydrocarbons with sequestration or through renewables and green hydrogen production. So that work is afoot now, and we're making some progress with that. That's really been sort of the you're asking sort of why are vehicles not available? Vehicles aren't available because the fueling infrastructure is not available. And the fueling infrastructure is not available because we haven't been working at scale. We've been working at sort of pilot project scale. Now, having said that, we see infrastructure rolling out in the Lower Mainland, where I live in Vancouver, we've got 4 stations. We've got another handful of stations that are under development that'll be available shortly. We've got somewhere around 100 vehicles that are operating at the existing 4 stations, and taxi fleets and with ride hailing services, and things like that. So we do see it's sort of percolating. And Zen, I would say, we do have a fuel cell vehicle. So it is possible. Maybe not in Alberta right now, but in Vancouver, yeah, that you can purchase and drive a Toyota or a Hyundai fuel cell vehicle off the lot.
Okay, a couple things you put on the table that I want to chat about a little more, because I don't know what the infrastructure rollout is in California currently. Maybe you do. Last time I checked, it was 49 stations, and I'm interested to see that Vancouver has advanced, because I thought there was also one in Burnaby and also one in Kelowna. But every time I talk to somebody about, okay, so when it seems to me we just need a fueling station in Edmonton and a fueling station in Calgary, and I could get a vehicle that would allow me to go back and forth between the two. So they've managed to figure out those technical details in Vancouver. What's the reason why it's harder to I guess create that same infrastructure in other of our major cities? If it seems to me, if Vancouver can do it, we should be able to do it here. What's the different factor?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we're not trying right now to, when I say we, in terms of a strategy, develop this network across the country. That will come. I think what's the focus is on right now is in developing hubs in specific regions. So there's a hub in Vancouver that's got this light duty network is part of. There's going to be some green production. There's going to be some port equipment, some trucks. In Alberta, there's a hub focused around the Edmonton region. And I think there's a group that's getting things started in Calgary, and that's moving along too. But in that Edmonton hub, really the focus is on heavy duty vehicles and getting those heavy duty vehicles operating more quickly. So there's a bus project, there's a truck project there that are ongoing, and I think that's really what, when you talk to people in that Edmonton hub, what they really want to develop are these heavy duty applications, because that gets you the best bang for the buck in terms of the value of the hydrogen that's being produced in Alberta. So eventually these clusters will form, and that the clusters will connect, and you can take your car coast to coast. The focus is really is building some density in these different regions, and that's how it's developing.
So let's then talk about what's happening in the rest of the country, because I have heard quite a bit about the hydrogen hub in Edmonton. Edmonton Global's doing a great job of advancing that, but you've told us there's one in Vancouver. What is happening throughout the prairies, and give us an idea of what this picture looks like in the rest of the country?
Sure. I think Quebec is probably the next sort of most advanced region. There's hydrogen. There's a hydrogen fueling station in Quebec City. There's a fleet of light duty vehicles that operates using that. There's a number of additional light duty stations that are coming online. There's a very large green hydrogen production plant in, I think, Bécancour, Quebec, that is operational now. There's work in terms of developing synthetic fuels using hydrogen. So there's that buzz of activity there. And then we're seeing some things in Atlantic Canada too. There's an Atlantic Canada Alliance that's been set up with interested stakeholders. And, I think we're going to see some hydrogen production in that region, in the not too distant future.
And would they also then do we've talked about the different colors in previous segments. So green hydrogen, as I understand it, is hydrogen created through an electrolysis process. So you're not using fossil fuels as a base energy. Blue hydrogen uses natural gas, but then has a sequestration aspect so that you're not seeing greenhouse gas emissions. And then gray hydrogen, which we are producing, doesn't have the carbon capture aspect. Have I got all that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so what would Atlantic Canada be doing? Would they be doing similar to what we are doing with blue hydrogen?
Yeah, Atlantic Canada it's a very interesting, diverse region in that they have a lot of different energy sources. But where they really do well is wind. They have excellent wind resources, and so the development of large scale hydrogen production using wind is really, it looks good. The economics look very positive. So I wouldn't be surprised. I think we'll see a variety of production projects develop in the region, but I really think that this tie into wind is what makes sort of Atlantic Canada special.
Okay, let's. I need you to go back though and tell us about the experience of driving a hydrogen vehicle. Do you have a Toyota Mirai or do you have the Hyundai product?
We have the Hyundai Nexo.
Okay,
Yeah.
so tell us what it's like, because I think that people are accustomed to seeing what an electric vehicle looks like when you plug it in. We've seen the electric charging stations. Obviously, we know what it's like to drive a traditional combustion engine vehicle or a diesel vehicle. What is fueling up with a hydrogen vehicle like?
Yeah, I mean the fueling up experience is pretty similar to your current experience at a gasoline pump. Obviously, different energy source, but you're connecting and you're filling in maybe 3-4 minutes. With the Nexo, I believe we're somewhere around 650 kilometer range. And then when you're driving the vehicle, it drives a lot like an electric vehicle because essentially it is an electric vehicle. It's got an electric motor driving the wheels. You're just generating the electrons on board instead of charging a battery. So yeah, it's got really nice pep. It's good off the line, so you get that good front end torque, as the automotive engineers like to say. So if you want to squeal the tires, you can do that. And then they're just driving it. It's great. We in the fall we were part of a rally with a group of 4 other Nexos. We went around BC. So we drove out to Hope, from Vancouver to Hope, and then up north. We came around through Pemberton and then back along the Sea to Sky. So it was beautiful, and I think we traveled 540 kilometers or something like that. But we just wanted to show everybody what the range was, and so we did that and tracked our progress on social media. So that was a fun rally.
That's awesome. Now, I guess that's just it. I don't know how many passenger vehicles can get 650 kilometers as a range. So that's one of the advantages, I would say, about the Switch, and one of the advantages that we have that we see over electric vehicles. I think electric vehicles are increasing their range, but to be there right away. Can you also tell us, is there anything that happens in winter? I mean, it's one thing to be driving in the beautiful weather that you get in Vancouver, but that's been one of the reservations I think that there's been in Alberta, is that we have a lot of minus 30 days, and that reduces the range of a traditional electric vehicle. What's the performance in low temperatures of a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle?
Yeah, it doesn't change the range really, because it doesn't impact the gaseous hydrogen in the tank the same way it impacts a battery. So there are ways and techniques that the automotive manufacturers have learned to protect the fuel cell and the fuel cell engine, so you can start up in cold temperatures and operate fairly reliably. I will say with the heavy duty trucks, the Class 8 trucks and the buses, part of why we're running these 2 demonstration programs out of Edmonton is to prove that out. So the trucks are going to operate between Edmonton and Calgary, and the buses are going to operate in that Edmonton region. So I think we'll get a good test case, and we'll validate that those particular vehicles can operate at cold temperatures.
What is the heat like in the cabin? Because that's what I've always wondered about, is can you get enough heat generated from an electric vehicle the same way that you can from a combustion engine vehicle?
Yeah, it's the blessing and the curse of being a really efficient engine. So battery electric is the same. Battery electric is very efficient. Because it's so efficient, it doesn't generate any heat. So you have to use those valuable electrons to make heat on board, which hurts your fuel efficiency. Fuel cell is sort of halfway in between. You don't produce as much heat as an internal combustion engine, because a fuel cell is 50% efficient instead of 25% efficient, like the engine in your car. So you do produce some low grade heat. You typically have to supplement that with some other type of heating source. So you have to use some of the electricity to generate heat in that way. So so I guess the bottom line though is for a commercial vehicle, for the Hyundai Nexo or say a New Flyer fuel cell bus, as a passenger you don't notice that. The only thing you notice is your fuel efficiency in those really cold months is going to dip slightly.
Slightly is, I mean, I think that can be manageable. I think my fuel efficiency dips anyway in winter because I've got to put the winter tires on. So I know I don't get the same range as I do in the summer as it is. So I think is it a significant amount? Because last thing you want to do is be on the road expecting to get 650 kilometers to get to your next fueling station and then get stranded in the middle. And so what would you say the deficiency might be in winter?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't hazard a guess in terms of a percentage, but it's like even in Vancouver, we have cold. We drive to Whistler in the Nexo. We don't appreciably notice that range difference from season to season because we do this for a living. We track buses in Palm Springs and other places where they're using fuel cell vehicles. In that case, it's more the air conditioning than the heat.
Right.
But we can't see a small dip in looking at that. It's sort of it's less than, I'd say less than 15%.
So talk to me a bit about the economics of it, because obviously as soon as we get the infrastructure built out and we start producing these on a higher scale, the cost will come down. But it strikes me that must be one of the big barriers about why it is other options are still the preference for consumers. What is the cost excess or differential that you'd have on a hydrogen vehicle first off, and then I want to talk to you about the operating costs.
Yeah, the hydrogen vehicle, I mean, we paid for the vehicle, a small premium, I think, for a luxury a compact SUV like the Nexo. So it's not like it's 2x or something like that. There's still a premium because they're not making them in the same quantities.
I'm thinking like $60,000-$70,000. Am I in the right range?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And then what about the operating costs? I mean, is there a point where after you've been driving a vehicle like this for X number of months or X number of years, you're better off than if you'd been using a traditional engine vehicle?
Yeah, I don't think it's more equivalent.
Okay.
I don't think you do this for massive energy savings over the course of the vehicle's life. So typically we fill up. It's about, with the Nexo, it's about $60, $70 for a fill, and we get that 650 kilometers. That's not appreciably different, I think, than probably what you pay at the pump to fill up. So it's pretty close. But to get the price of that fuel right now, there are things like carbon credits that are keeping that price lower. If we want to operate without things like carbon credits, we need to get the scale of production up to so that it's comparable to gasoline and diesel. And then you have sort of more of an apples to apples comparison.
Are there fuel taxes on hydrogen?
Yeah, I don't believe there are fuel taxes on hydrogen yet.
I know, yet. That's, I guess, the key, because they'll have to pay for the road somehow. One more thing that people are always concerned about is the safety issues. I mean, I think everybody remembers the Hindenburg. So there's this impression that hydrogen is not a safe method of transport. Are you able to explain why it is safe?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know this, but hydrogen has been part of our world for over 100 years. So there's this hydrogen backbone that's operating in the background that you don't necessarily know about. but it's used to make fertilizer. It's a feedstock for gasoline and diesel. It's used in the agricultural business. It's used in the high tech sector to make things like chips. So it's there's 100 years of very safe sort of activity that's been recorded with hydrogen, and I think we don't really know about it. These trucks are running through your neighborhoods and on your highways, and we just don't pay any attention. So because of that, there's a very established set of codes and standards that exist, that have been tried and true, and industry follows. So really, it does have a very good safety record already, and of course there's some pros and cons with hydrogen. One of the pros is that it doesn't hang around, so it's it's the lightest element, and so if there is any type of leakage, it dissipates immediately, unlike other fuels where you'll get this concentration that you need to worry about. Hydrogen just dissipates into the atmosphere. So, you don't.
So if there was a collision that caused a breach in the tank, there wouldn't be a huge explosion.
Yeah. So there are SAE and Federal Motor Vehicle or Canadian Motor Vehicle safety standards that have done things like done crash tests and looked at things like that. So you can't say that that couldn't be breached. But if it did vent, it would vent in a very predictable way, in a predictable spot on the vehicle, and you have emergency response personnel that would be trained, would know what to look for, just like they do with a natural gas vehicle. There's a lot of natural gas vehicles in California. Half the buses, or more than half the buses, are CNG. So people know how to treat that, a flammable gas in an emergency.
Are you able to park in underground parking garages? I still don't know exactly why it is that there's always warnings in certain garages that you can't park propane vehicles. I gather it must have something to do with the expansion of the gas when you change temperatures. That's what my presumption is. But is there a similar problem with hydrogen vehicles? Can you still use underground parking?
Yeah, you're not limited at all to where you're parking. So yeah, so we bring our vehicle to downtown Vancouver and park underground, and that's safe and legal.
Oh, okay. I'm envious. I would love. Okay, if I ever come out to Vancouver, I'm going to get you to take me for a test drive. But maybe I'll have a chance to ride in an electric or a hydrogen fuel cell bus or a long haul vehicle before then. So let's talk about these two projects, because I thought that with the Japanese Olympics in Tokyo, we were supposed to see an unfolding of this new exciting hydrogen economy. Things, of course, got derailed because of COVID a bit. And I don't think that they were as successful in unfolding that as I had anticipated. So I thought that there might still be some barriers in rolling out hydrogen fuel cell buses. But tell us where we're at on that so that I can see where the promise and opportunity is.
Yeah, so specifically in Edmonton, it's Edmonton Transit that is leading what we're calling the AZET project, and working with Strathcona and Banff and Calgary are also on the steering team. And the buses, they're operating a New Flyer New Flyer fuel cell buses made in Winnipeg. New Flyer has, I would say, somewhere between 75, 100 fuel cell electric buses either deployed currently or soon to be deployed. They've been working with the technology since the 90s. They're very good at it. It's a very polished product, and we're excited for these to get into regular revenue service with Edmonton, and so that'll be happening the second half of this year. We're going to see.
How are they going to solve the fueling station problem that we identified at the start?
Yeah, there's a fueling station that's being developed and will be ready for the buses. We haven't named the fueling partner yet, so stay tuned. That's coming, but that work's going on in the background on the infrastructure. So. And that will be a common fueling infrastructure to the truck project. If I could pivot, and And the truck project is led by the Alberta Motor Transport Association, AMTA. So they've been great in sort of showing a lot of leadership there. And the truck is a Freightliner truck using a Dana electric drive and a Ballard fuel cell, and it's going to operate between Edmonton and Calgary. And it's a very unique truck in that Alberta carries very heavy weights. I think it has something to do with the rail or lack thereof of rail. So you see these large B train or long combination vehicles on the highways, and so this truck will be one of those. So carrying more weight than you typically see. So I think this will be this will have the most sort of towing capacity of any fuel cell vehicle that or fuel cell truck that I've seen, certainly in North America.
So tell me the vision about how that's going to then help with the transport traffic between Calgary and Edmonton. So I can see where you're going. So you've got the central fueling station for both buses and trucks, and that's fine for buses because it'll be internal, but long haul vehicles will need to have another fueling station, I would presume, when they get down here, unless you're intending for them to come down here and then go back up on a single fuel and then continue to have the refueling station just in Edmonton. Or are we not that far behind in Calgary?
I'd say that you're not that far behind.
Okay.
I'd say some things are happening there. So yeah, it's, the idea here is that the heavy duty trucking sector in Alberta really can become the anchor tenant to become this great regional customer for hydrogen production, starting I think in the Edmonton area. I should mention the Transition Accelerator is part of this AZATEC, the truck project, as well as the bus project, and have been really instrumental in getting it off the ground. That's a group based in Alberta. And yeah, I think their vision is that we're going to see this domestic growth focused on heavy duty trucking that will ultimately transition into export for Alberta, because I think that's the end state is, we want to keep these jobs in Alberta and transition just to a lower carbon intensity fuel. So,
do you know what the range that they're talking about is on both of those? Is because you mentioned for passenger vehicles 650 kilometers, which is better than a typical combustion engine vehicle. Is that what they're aiming for both buses and for the long haul trucks as well? That they have at least an equal to or even better range?
Yeah, I think it's different between the buses and the trucks because they have different sort of duty cycles. But the buses generally meet the block or the route requirements for the transit agencies, because hydrogen has better energy density than, as I mentioned, you can put in a battery. I think these transit agencies will end up using both technologies, and the fuel cell buses will be used for some of the longer range vehicles. I'd have to take a look at the New Flyer spec sheet to give you the exact number, but I know that it satisfies most of Edmonton's routes.
So tell me what is happening with the long haul vehicles, or is this going to require a complete replacement of the engine, or complete replacement of the hauling vehicle, or can you just do an engine replacement? I'm wondering what we would expect to see if this begins to catch on and it begins to make some sense for companies. What is the capital turnover that they're going to have to expect?
Yeah, I've been in the sector for a long time, and I mentioned I was with Ballard Power Systems. My personal experience with retrofitting existing vehicles is not great. I would say you quite often end up spending more than you would have sort of building a purpose-built vehicle in the first place. So that's a little bit my bias, but I think that we're not going to be seeing retrofitted vehicles. I think what we're going to be seeing is a transition. So as vehicles come to sort of retirement age, they're going to be replaced with zero emission options, and with that's actually something that then we spend a lot of time doing, is working with fleet operators to build transition plans so that they can do that efficiently.
Well, talk to me a bit about that, because I I have a car that is a 1998 Jimmy, so I make my vehicles last a long time. Now, I think when you're putting the wear and tear on a bus or a truck, you're going to probably have a turnover that's faster than that. But what would be a reasonable transition if somebody's bought a traditional vehicle today, either for use in as a bus or for long haul? What would be the typical replacement timeline on that?
Oh, on a bus, we know that fairly well. In the United States, there are guidelines around that. It's fixed at 12 years.
Hmm.
In Canada, we tend to extend that a little bit, and the buses are more like 14 years, maybe 15 years. Um, so yeah, I mean, what we've done with different transit agencies is we build this transition plan that's, you know, sort of uh, rooted in some logic around the retirement of vehicles and logical replacements and logical steps in terms of developing infrastructure. So infrastructure scales at certain sizes. You can't, it's not linear. There are certain building blocks that you can apply. So when we talk to a transit agency, for example, we go through this whole analysis and we say, okay, what is the baseline fleet? Where do you want to get to? What are the steps in terms of introducing new fueling infrastructure? And then how do we optimize the cost so you do that for the lowest total cost of ownership? So there are a lot of pieces that go into that. But generally we're trying not to, we're trying not to just retire vehicles arbitrarily early, because they're manufactured. Even if you're just looking at emissions, there are costs associated with making new vehicles. So we're like you and your Jimmy, we're we try to extend the life of the existing diesel or CNG buses, while at the same time kind of hitting targets. In California, it's just as an FYI, it's 2040. That's the date that all transit agencies have to convert completely over to zero emission. So,
And is that achievable without having a lot of sunk costs or stranded capital? Can you, if you have that far a time horizon, can you do that conversion in reasonable without reasonable extra costs?
Yeah, we are. So one of the agencies we work with is Sunline Transit in the Coachella Valley. We started working with them 4 or 5 years ago on their fleet transition plan. They have 75 full-size buses, and they're at 23 of those are fuel cell vehicles. They have a number of battery electric as well. I think 4 or 5. So we're approaching half of that fleet now in terms of the transition. They generate hydrogen on site because there's available low carbon electricity. I don't know if you've ever been to Palm Springs on vacation, but you drive in and there are these wind farms all over the place. So there's a lot of renewable energy, and they're also building in some redundancy with delivered liquid. So there's an example of an agency that's well on its way. They'll actually hit zero emissions by 2035. So they'll be 5 years ahead of everyone else.
All right. What about a large transit fleet? Because I hazard a guess that Edmonton has a lot more than 75 that they would have to turn over. I don't know if you know what the size of the fleet is, but I'm trying to get a sense of the scale when you're dealing with a large metro transit system.
Yeah, it is a larger feat for sure. But the same principles apply. And Edmonton is going through that exercise right now, looking at what their transition plan is going to be, and making decisions based on some of those trade-offs that we talked about. So it is, you're right. Having more buses makes it a little more challenging. Having more depots makes it a bit more challenging, but it's not unachievable.
And is Calgary going through the same thing? You said that we're sort of operating in tandem between Calgary and Edmonton. Do you know how far advanced they are on switching over their bus fleet?
I don't. I think as part of this AZET project that we talked about, they're going to look at that fleet transition plan a little farther down the line, so I couldn't really speak to that.
Interesting. Okay, so tell me what the process is that you'd go through with a trucking company, because if you're trying to optimize the existing investment, is it a slightly different calculation? You said that with buses, we know that it's sort of 12 years. We try to make them last 14 to 15 years in Canada. What would be the similar type of measure when you're looking at long haul vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, a long haul vehicle in Alberta, to be honest, we haven't done that calculation yet. But I suspect if were we to do that, we would go through the same calculus. We would take a baseline of the fleet. We would look at the sort of retirement schedule for the vehicles, and we would try to time the fuel cell electric truck replacements with those retirements. And then again, sort of overlaying the infrastructure. So what would the infrastructure start with? For example, with the Azatec project, we're using a very simple hydrogen fueling system that will suit the needs of that pilot. But you would need to scale that up to more of a commercial fueling system, and then ultimately, increase the capacity of that system for the full fleet. So there are these steps along the way you'd have to meet.
You know what I like about this conversation is you're very practical about how you would approach it. It sounds very logical. The investment timing seems to make sense. You're talking about building the infrastructure out at the same time. Now, this is where practical reality collides with political ambition, because I keep hearing our political leaders talk about very aggressive targets to meet in a very short time frame. And I'm wondering if some political reality is setting in that yes, we can get there, but we may need to be staged. We may need to have a longer time horizon. If we work with industry to make sure that we're not phasing out their investment early, then we're going to achieve the target and get a lot more buy-in. And I'm wondering what your assessment is of the political environment we find ourselves in.
Sure. So the political environment, I think, if we think about the province of Alberta or British Columbia, even nationally, I mentioned I've been in this sector for 22 years. I've never seen the climate better than it is right now, because there are levers that you can use to help the end users with the economics. And so I mentioned carbon credits in British Columbia, so that's a good example. There's a zero emission vehicle mandate in British Columbia that's sort of driving the deployment of vehicles, the availability of vehicles. We saw in I guess September of last year, the Clean Fuels Fund was released by Enercan. That's 1.5 billion in support for renewables and hydrogen production. I think that you're going to see, as a result of that fund, large scale production in different regions across Canada. So I think we have the right levers now. I think the hard part is just plowing through, getting some initial deployments and demos working, operational, getting some data, and then trying to scale that. We're not having any trouble getting started. I think with this transition, I think there's just a massive amount of work to sort of changing the world the way we think we need to. So it's not sexy. It's permitting and training and spare parts and all the things that are the backbone of a successful deployment. And that's the real elbow grease that's going on right now.
I think the problem that we face in Alberta is there seems to be a mixed message around the issue of hydrogen, because I think what I'm encouraged to see in Europe is that they've come to the understanding that natural gas, particularly if it's combined with the emissions abatement technology and nuclear, they both form a part of cleaning the energy grid and transitioning. I don't feel the same confidence at the federal level that they've come to that same conclusion, maybe on small scale nuclear, which I'm glad to see, but there seems to be a mixed message happening on natural gas when you've got Quebec making a decision to end exploration of natural gas and oil, when you've got the environment minister that we have, Stephen Guilbeault, who's been pretty negative on both nuclear and natural gas. I'm just wondering if there's some more work that needs to be done to try to get to the consensus. Because you guys at your association, you see a world where we can have both, where you can have hydrogen developed from the zero emitting sources, but also have it developed from natural gas, which is a little bit more cost effective. And I'm just wondering if there's some more work that needs to be done to persuade all of our political leaders in all of our political parties that moving down that path makes some sense. What do you see? Do you think that that the reality is setting in, that there's a place for both, or do you think that that there's some danger that the blue hydrogen area is going to get abridged somehow?
Yeah, I can't really sort of speak to the politics around the natural gas side, but what I can speak to is the national strategy that NRCan released and that Zen was the lead author for. Like what we did was we looked at a net zero 2050 target and said, what needs to happen in order to meet that. And we absolutely think that there's biofuels and electrification and conservation are a big part of that. But a big chunk is going to be hydrogen. We think about 30% of the delivered energy is going to come from hydrogen. So that's a big piece, and that makes up about 25% of the emission reduction required to hit 2050. If we just do the math around how much hydrogen that is, and just the amount of demand, we need multiple sources of hydrogen production. So that's the modeling that we've done and the conclusion that we came to in doing that study. So we would expect that there'll be green hydrogen production in multiple regions. We're very active in green hydrogen production, so that's near and dear to our heart. But we're also practical enough to understand that in Alberta, it's more likely to come from natural gas with carbon sequestration, and just to hit the scale that we need, we think that both sort of pathways need to exist.
So is there an application? Because the other thing you probably know, I mean, it's a lot easier discussion to have in British Columbia with the immense hydro power resources, same with Quebec, and also with Ontario having immense nuclear resources for electricity. I think there might, and Manitoba, I should also add on the hydroelectric power. Alberta and Saskatchewan face a challenge in greening their electricity grid too, because we're so reliant on first coal and now we're transitioning to natural gas. I don't know if there is a hydrogen application to greening our electricity grid. I've talked before about potentially nuclear. So we did do a nuclear segment where small modular nuclear reactors could actually fit seamlessly into our natural gas plants. So we're able to use existing infrastructure. But I don't know what the hydrogen story is as it's applied to generating electricity. Is there one?
There certainly can be, and it's related to blending low carbon intensity hydrogen into the natural gas supply. So you're decarbonizing that natural gas, and if that natural gas is then run through a turbine, and of course there are a myriad of technical questions that have to be answered before that happens. But if you can do that, then you're reducing the emissions from that turbine, proportionally to the amount of hydrogen that's an input into the blend. So certainly there's that option. I think the other thing in Alberta is Alberta also has great wind resources. So you can imagine that the grid is going to green, using those renewable sources as well.
As long as there's the sort of, I think one of the issues that we have with wind and solar is the intermittency. And so I suppose if you can use, that's why I was wondering about the full hydrogen story when it comes to electricity, because I think one project I heard about in Ontario was on a hydrogen project, was a forklift project where the company used wind to create hydrogen to power forklifts. And I'm wondering if there's discussions about how wind and solar, when they come on strong. Should part of that energy be used to create a more durable storage option being hydrogen that then can make sure that when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining, you've got another way of providing energy to the grid. I'm just sort of I'm mapping that out because that's how I see creating more stability out of those intermittent sources. But I don't know if there are projects happening that are going to make that occur.
There are, and certainly in Europe and elsewhere, we've seen the use of hydrogen. You're talking about hydrogen as energy storage, essentially.
Correct. Yeah.
In California, there's a lot of work going on. I think we're going to see some projects announced in the near term. So absolutely. So those are two. You described sort of two. There's two separate sort of pathways. There's low carbon intensity hydrogen blending and reducing the emissions from a natural gas turbine. There's using hydrogen as energy storage to connect renewables to the grid, and running those. So you would generate hydrogen when the demand was low, and you would run that hydrogen then through a fuel cell generator and put clean electrons onto the grid. So that absolutely is another option, and we're seeing that developing in different parts of the world, and it's a nice sort of companion piece for renewables. It solves that sort of that dispatchable power question that hangs around with renewable power.
Let me ask you one more because you're on the coast, and I just got back from Panama, so I had an opportunity to go through the canal and watch a Canadian steamship line ship incidentally go through at the time. But I was aware that there was a lot of billowing smoke coming out of the marine vessel, and I think we're moving towards a low sulfur fuel for marine vessels. But is there a hydrogen application for marine vessels as well?
There is, and it's coming. Probably not as quickly as things like Class 8 trucks and buses and cars, but there's a lot of work going on, and there's a few options with very large scale marine vessels. You may look at something like liquid hydrogen stored on board as a fuel source. So that's one option. The other option is to use the low carbon intensity hydrogen to make methanol or to make ammonia and burn those fuels on an engine on these large marine vessels. You're still reducing emissions substantially. So where that's going to land, I don't think anyone knows yet. That's one of those open questions in terms of sort of where industry is going. But I can say that just being in this sector and being a consultant, everyone's asking that question now. So there's a lot of modeling and a lot of discussion going on about the feasibility of those different pathways.
Talk to me a bit about where Canada fits into the world environment, because I always feel like Canada has these great ideas, and then because we can't get it off the ground because of permitting delays or whatever else, we're late getting to market. And we get outmaneuvered. I think we got outmaneuvered, for instance, on LNG as a prime example, not only by the Americans, but also by the Australians. And so I do have this uneasiness that it takes us so long to get projects approved that the rest of the world is going to move on before we've even got out of the gate. I hope you can assuage those fears and tell me, no, actually, we're in the lead. So maybe you can tell us where we compare to the rest of the world and who really is in the lead on this race.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a mixed answer here. I think we're on the production side. There's a lot of work happening everywhere, and looking at Australia and Western Europe. Now you're starting to see in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, low carbon intensity hydrogen production. So we really need to get moving and get to scale on the production side. So, there's people in Alberta that eat, drink, and breathe this stuff every day that are working on it. But there is some risk that we end up like the LNG sector and end up coming in a little bit behind. So we really need to accelerate that production. Here's the good news. If you look at things like fuel cell engines in Burnaby, we have a little area we call Nafion Valley. It's a component in a fuel cell. And we're seeing that that there are now, I mean, in addition to Ballard and Loop and AVL and Unilia, I mean, we're seeing multiple fuel cell development activities happen in this sector, and we're seeing fuel cell engineering talent from China, from Michigan, from Germany, all coming here and helping to develop that sector, and money from investments from different parties all sort of focus here. So because because Ballard sort of started the sort of the upswing in terms of fuel cell technology, and because there's all this expertise here and there's all this supporting infrastructure in terms of testing and things like that, we're really leading that, and that's a good thing. And then in terms of green hydrogen production, one of the major players is Hydrogenics, which is a subsidiary of Cummins. Now they're in the Mississauga area, and they're selling their systems all over the world. So we have Canadian technology, good jobs, manufacturing that we're exporting, and doing a good job of. So I think that's really a good news story. I think we need to make sure that we stay on track with fuel production, so we're competitive.
What do you think the world looks like? Because I feel like there's been a pretty significant shift in the business sector, the investment sector, and a real embracing of this notion that, we actually can get to zero emissions or net zero emissions. But I feel like there's maybe the public is a little further behind, and maybe the public is split. I mean, when you look at, I keep dragging you back into politics, but only because we're now seeing that there's going to be a change in leadership at the federal level. And one of the things that I think may have capsized Aaron O'Toole's leadership is that he seemed to be flip-flopping on the issue of, do you price carbon dioxide emissions or do you not? And my sense of it is that the industry is prepared to embrace a carbon price because it has prompted all of this innovative thinking about how do we get to the finish line. And so I think that there's almost I don't know if the public fully realizes what the world might look like in 10 or 20 years. You've got this split where you've got a group that wants to get there by 2030, which is only 8 years, which may be too fast. And then another group that says, why do we need to do this at all? So how would you bridge that divide?
That's a $1 million question. I'm seeing, I don't know if I can answer that question. I will say I'm seeing the same thing with industry. So when we meet with large, again, we're a consulting company. People that I used to work with primarily were the technology companies, the converted, if you will, in the sector. Now I get calls from mining companies, from pulp and paper sector, people in turn that work at port operations. So just a myriad of different areas, and they're really looking for they're looking for decarbonization options, and they don't necessarily love fuel cells, or that doesn't have to be the thing, but they're just looking at saying, we need to decarbonize. What tools do we have in the toolkit? So these are some heavy emitters that are pulling these decarbonization solutions. So it's been fascinating in my 22 years to see to these people who would not be interested in talking to really pulling on these options.
I have completely seen the same thing. I was just meeting with somebody yesterday who said to me, 6 years ago, I might not have been interested in pursuing a net zero option. And he says, now carbon pricing has turned out to create all of this innovation, and he doesn't oppose it. And so I don't know if you've seen some of that conversion more recently, but I've been sort of surprised as I've been talking to business owners how much they're embracing the challenge. And so that's why I find it interesting, is maybe it's just a little bit of a lag that perhaps the public won't be persuaded until they see some of these options rolling out, and that they work, and that it's being embraced by heavy industry. And they're saying, hey, well, if we can get buses and we can get trucks going back and forth between our major centers, maybe I can consider that too. Maybe it's a matter of needing to see it go to market at a price that is affordable before you get the complete buy-in. But I'm curious to know from your perspective, when did you start seeing a bit of a shift of business leaders thinking, we can't do this, to yes, we can? Has that been recent?
Yeah, I think, when I left Ballard, I thought, oh, I'll be a consultant and things will be more balanced. I'll be able to take my kids to school, and it'll be fun. And sort of two years into that, I don't know, I'd say 2017, 2018, that's where this shift happened. And so the same thing you described. It's just this people have embraced the need to decarbonize, and carbon pricing has been a really valuable tool. It's something that's sorry, people are calling me. It's something that's really been useful in British Columbia, because it's helped to fund these fueling stations, as well as reduce the cost at the pump for the end user. So that's why we see 4 stations in BC and an additional 5 or 6 that are coming online, and we're not seeing that in Ontario, for example, is because there's this carbon pricing mechanism that's supporting that. So it's been really it's been interesting to see.
Well, I've got Clinton has been feverishly responding to everything that we've been saying along the line. He said it's kind of like when the horse and buggy face competition from cars. Sometimes industries do end up with a much smaller market share over time. And also many business owners like myself have a responsibility to help leave a cleaner, better planet for kids who are in university today and the business leaders of tomorrow. So I think that we're in this sort of public transition into accepting that the world is going to look different in the future than it does now. But we still have the issue of our major competitor and trading partner is the United States. And do you feel like there's been that same kind of embracing of this in the United States? Certainly California sounds like they're one major jurisdiction that has. But generally speaking, is there also going to be a major hydrogen push in the US?
Yeah, we're seeing I'll say it's new. So like you said, we've been working in California for years. California is miles ahead of I think any jurisdiction really in North America, just in terms of what they've done with the vehicles, trucks, buses. But the rest of the United States, really, we've seen, I'd say over the last 6 months, a real shift. So, where we would spend all of our time in Canada and in California, now we're starting to work in New Mexico and Texas and the Northeast US. So we're seeing there's that interest, and I think that interest is connected to Biden stimulus funding, and some of the impacts of federal support that are just coming online now.
I think, that's part of the reason why there's an ideological divide, is that the conservatives I speak with, they are of the view that if it's going to work, it should be 100% market driven. You shouldn't need to have additional supports and subsidies. If these things can't stand on their own, then maybe it's not worth pursuing. How would you counter that argument?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty deep philosophical rift. We just going through these projects, like I said, we need to get to scale. We can clearly show with the technology that exists today that we can get to cost parity. Mm-hmm. The question is, can we wait 75 years or 100 years to slowly transition and scale up? If you think the answer is yes, you're going to fall on one side of that divide. I fall on the other. I would say no, that there's an imperative for things to happen more quickly, and to do that, you just can't go from where we are today to competitive with a industry that's been around for 120 years overnight. It's just not feasible. It's apples to oranges in terms of scale. So there has to be there has to be some kind of intervention, and carbon pricing, like I said, in British Columbia and elsewhere, that seems like a really great tool. And it seems to drive the right behaviors, is what I've noticed.
So, do you look at the government measures as being temporary so that it can help accelerate, or is that going to have to be a permanent feature? I mean, can you see a future where these technologies will develop to a scale and to a point where they can be competitive without having government support?
Yeah, I think there's no reason. Like, for example, if you look at an internal combustion engine and a fuel cell engine, the fuel cell engine is more expensive now, but if you think about it, an internal combustion engine is a marvel of engineering. It has very tight tolerances and manufacturing specs. It's very complex, and there's so many moving parts. There's so many points of friction. A fuel cell engine is like a loaf of bread. It's a series of plates that are stacked together with, and it drives this electrochemical reaction. It's just such a simpler design, and a battery is the same way. So for example, just, you're asking me about the capital cost of the vehicles. It's very easy to look at those two things and say, okay, yeah, if I was building 15 million of these and 15 million of these, they would be cost competitive. In fact, probably less for the fuel cell or the batteries, for example. So yeah, I think the technology and is there, and I think it's a question now of driving adoption and getting to scale.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question I asked you off the air, and I didn't like your answer. So I'm hoping that I can persuade you otherwise. I asked you a question off the air about whether we should be looking at creating a hydrogen vehicle plant for manufacturing in Western Canada, because it does seem to me that because they are so far advanced on electrifying their grid in Eastern Canada and places where there's hydro, it just makes sense that we might see a greater adoption of more traditional electric vehicles. But for places like California, for Texas, for Alberta, maybe it makes sense for us to try to forge ahead with some kind of leadership on creating a plant here, especially if there's a simpler design. It's not necessary for us to use the existing manufacturing plants out east, especially if the demand is going to be out west. So you told me, no, it's not going to happen, but I'm hoping that I've just made an argument that you're going to say, actually, that makes perfect sense. Is there anything going on to create a hydrogen auto plant here? I know we've talked mostly about the opportunity initially being in buses and long haul vehicles, but darn it, I still want to have one of those electric fuel cell vehicles one day.
Yeah. Let me put it this way, so more optimistically here. I think for Alberta, if I was an Alberta citizen, what would be most important to me is that the hundreds of thousands of oil and gas jobs that I was able to transition into a similar transportation fuel sector, just focusing on a lower carbon intensity fuel. So that would, if I'm in Alberta, that's my primary objective, is to make sure that we're still selling transportation fuel, and all those jobs are transitioning. It would be
and that makes sense too. I mean, I like what you say there too, because there have been visions put forward that we would retrain our energy sector workers to install solar panels. And while there may be some of that, it actually does make far more sense for the kind of training and this infrastructure that we've created to focus on creating a new type of transportation fuel. So I appreciate that you've seen that too.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of a purpose-built fuel cell electric truck or passenger vehicle, I think that would be great. But that's a tough haul, because the supply chains and the manufacturing investment has generally been focused in different areas. So it would be a pretty substantial task. And I guess the only thing I would say is I would look at the cost of that. Not that it's not possible. I think it is possible, but the cost of that versus focusing on what Alberta is good at, making transportation fuel and exporting that. And that would be my position.
Excellent. Well, if I have any members who are interested in doing that assessment, that they're making because when I became president of Alberta Enterprise Group and I started calling our members, I was amazed at how many had net zero and how do we get there as kind of their number one business concern. But if somebody is having that conversation, thinking about how do we get there, what is the way to get started? Because it sounds like you assist people in walking through plans. How would you even find somebody who would be able to help you with that analysis so that you make the best decisions and the ones that are most cost effective?
Yeah. Well, not to be too self-serving, but that's what Zen does. Is we we'll talk to people in different sectors, and we're pretty knowledgeable about hydrogen production and hydrogen utilization, and we have a lot of models, and we can run run different scenarios, and we've had, to be honest, we've had people that we talk to. And we go through an analysis and we say, look, you should be looking at electrification and not hydrogen because it makes more sense. And in some cases, it's a hybrid of different technologies. So we're not, we try to be practical and do what makes what gives you the best bang for your buck in terms of what are the best economics and what are the best carbon emission reductions, and you can look at that and make an informed decision.
Well, Jeff, I hope we have a chance to talk again. If there are any other major innovations happening or major developments, please be in touch so that we can keep up to speed on those. I'm so delighted at the work you're doing and that you've seen such a change in the last few years. Thanks again for such a terrific discussion. I sure appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
You bet. That is Jeff Grant. As I mentioned, he's a principal at Zen Clean Energy Solutions. And so he's observing the same thing that I've been observing, is that there's something that happened within the last 5 years. And maybe part of it is that before, trying to do these kinds of transitions was always perceived as not being cost effective, that it would cost more than it would generate. But I guarantee you, once entrepreneurs see a way to make money and create a new industry, that is when you end up with so much capital flowing in that it is transformative. And I think we're on the cusp of that. If anybody knows of a vehicle manufacturer who would be interested in setting up shop in our home province, I would love to talk to them. I'm just planting that seed because it's been sticking with me for a little while that we probably need new manufacturing facilities. And why would we just continue to rely in Ontario? Because one of the issues that I've seen with electric vehicles is that the demand is at the moment exceeding the supply. And so if we're going to have the demand for hydrogen vehicles be out here, why not have the hydrogen vehicle production be out here? Just planting the seed, because I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to this show. So thank you so much for tuning in today. We were going to talk to Solzio with the Calgary Hotel Association, but I thought that might be a better topic for another day so we can get fully into it. And we will be back at it again next week. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you again. I'm Danielle Smith, president of Alberta Enterprise Group.